I've come up from Southampton. I'm a biologist, a research scientist down there. My research area is regenerative medicine. That's what I did my PhD in about 7 or 8 years ago now. And I'm still working in that area. My actual research project is about trying to control how stem cells work after you've injected them into the body using a special gel made up of particles of clay. So I'm trying to mix stem cells with clay to try and make bits of bone and cartilage and skin tissue and that kind of thing. Which sounds a bit of a crazy idea, but I've been given £1 million by the government to do it, so I really hope it's going to work. So the Christian Union are putting on this week of events to give you the opportunity to explore what Christianity, the message of Jesus Christ, is all about. And we really want to do this. The reason we want to do this is Christians call the message of Jesus Christ gospel. It literally means good news. And it's good because Jesus shows us that the ultimate reality behind everything, the reason you and I exist, is because of a God of love. So we're not here because of some great cosmic accident that just threw us into being, nor are we here on the whim of some omnipotent deity who made us with a flex of his muscles just because he can, but we're here out of the superabundant, overflowing generosity of the God of love. And if that's true, it changes everything. It means life's not ultimately about surviving in this world long enough to pass my genes. It's not some great cosmic exam that we've got to pass in order to somehow validate our existence. Life is all about living out our potential as people made by this God of love in order to know this God who loves us and made us to live in his love and live exploring the world he's made, understanding it, creating in it, and all that kind of thing. It's a very life-affirming, deeply humanising way of seeing the world. And yet we're very, very aware that there's all kinds of really, really fundamental objections and suspicions that you guys probably have about this worldview. Suspicions which can often, I think, prevent us from even looking into and exploring the possibility that this could be true. And so what we're wanting to do during these lunchtime events is to try and address some of these objections head on. And the big objection we're looking at today is this question of whether science has buried God, has made belief in God redundant and made it invalid. So that's the question. It's a very prominent question, an issue. This is here, so I'm putting the slides on. This is Peter Atkins, well-known chemist and populariser of science, and he talks about the relationship of science and religion quite broadly. He says, science is a system of belief founded securely on publicly shared, reproducible knowledge emerged from religion. As science discarded its chrysalis to become its present butterfly, it took over the heat. So for Peter Atkins, religion had a role to play in our intellectual history, but that role has now been thoroughly superseded by the supreme methods of science. So like this kind of beautiful butterfly emerging from a restrictive chrysalis, we've now emerged in all our enlightened knowledge in the world because of the power of science. This is James Watson, co-discovered with Crick of obstructive DNA. Here he's talking about religious scientists, so people like me. And he says, occasionally I meet, and I'm a bit embarrassed, because I cannot accept anyone who accepts truth by revelation. So that hurts me a little bit, but I take courage from the fact that there are other great scientists out there who have discovered Christianity while being a scientist. So this is Francis Collins, who was James Watson's successor. James Watson initiated the Human Genome Project, and Francis Collins saw its completion in 2003 with the complete mapping of the human genome. He wrote a biography shortly after that, explaining his development as a scientist, but also his conversion to Christianity. And at the end of that book, he said, I started this journey of intellectual exploration to confirm my atheism. That now lay in ruins as I was forced to admit the plausibility of the God hypothesis. So, if nothing else, that should give us pause for thought. It's not quite as simple as people like Atkins and James Watson would have us believe. It's quite possible to be immersed in science and yet find yourself compelled on the basis of the evidence to believe in Christianity. So that's what I want us to explore, really. Let me talk a bit more about my field, first of all. So the big breakthrough in my area of research was this paper here by Shinya Yamanaka, where he found you could turn on stem cells, this term induced pluripotency. The pluripotency of the stem cell is the ability of the stem cells to become all of the different tissues that make up our body. So when we were a little embryo, a little ball of cells, we couldn't really do much apart from split and divide, but we had the potential to become brain cells and blood cells and bone cells and all the other cells that make up our bodies in all their complexity. Now that potential is very quickly lost as our bodies develop. But this guy found that you could take one of your own, so adult specialised cells like from your skin or the inside of your cheek, or even cells washed out in your wee from your bladder, so disused bladder cells. If you grow them up in a flask, you can turn on 3 key genes and kind of return these cells to their pluripotent state. You can recover this lost potential. It's amazing, amazing discovery. So maybe one day you could wee into a pot, scientists could get your cells, grow them up, turn on these genes, and then use them to grow new neurons to treat your Parkinson's or something like that. And the way he knows that he's been able to do that is because of this chap here. This is a chimeric mouse. So a chimera is an organism with 2 distinct genetic identities. It happens naturally, very rarely, when embryos fuse. When you get twins and then they fuse, you get these 2 cell types of different genetic backgrounds in the same organism. But what you can do is with stem cells is you can use those stem cells to create these artificially, and that's what he did. And this is the kind of gold standard proof that you actually have stem cells. So he took his stem cells, he injected them into this developing embryo, they fused with the inner cell mass, which would later become the organism. So now this little embryo has 2 genetic types of cell in its development, and then it goes on to develop into this mouse, and those stem cells go on to contribute to all of the different tissues in that mouse. That's the proof. That's what when you know you've got stem cells. So it's a very powerful demonstration of an astonishing discovery, and it's exactly this kind of thing that gives science such credibility in our culture. This is Richard Dawkins making basically this same point. He says, science boosts its claim to truth by its spectacular ability to make matter and energy jump through hoops on command and to predict what will happen and when. And I think this is the real basis for the idea that science has invalidated belief in God. Science gives us this unique ability to really kind of discover stuff, to really acquire knowledge about the world. And that's led many to say this is exclusively the way we should try to approach reality and discover stuff about ourselves. So if your beliefs aren't backed up by the experimental method, then it's mere conjecture, mere speculation. And so you see religion, and you say, we can't rely on religion anymore, we have to rely on the methods of science. And anyway, science is so successful, so all-encompassing in its ability to give us this kind of fully orbed, comprehensive understanding of ourselves, that we don't need that anymore anyway. So then the claims, the exclusivity of science and the sufficiency of science. And you can see that really in what Peter Atkins was saying here. Science is the system of belief founded securely on publicly shared, reproducible knowledge. It's reliable knowledge. And then he goes on to say, there is no reason to suppose that science cannot deal with every aspect of existence. Only the religious, among whom I include not only the prejudiced but the uninformed, hope there is a dark corner of the physical universe, or the universe of experience, that science can never hope to illuminate. And they're the claims that I really want to examine during this talk, the sufficiency of science and the exclusivity of science. So first of all, let's think about the sufficiency of science. Science is all we need to understand ourselves. This is Daniel Dennett, who's very committed to this project. There is only one sort of stuff, namely matter, the physical stuff of physics, chemistry, and physiology. Okay? That's the only real stuff there is, the stuff you can do scientific experiments on. We can, in principle, we're not there yet, but scientists are working on it, account for every mental phenomenon using the same physical laws, principles, and raw materials. He's writing about consciousness there, and the phenomenon of consciousness. Now, I think for many of us, intuitively,
that seems inadequate. Science doesn't give us the type of explanations that we really need to completely understand the very things that are important, most important to us as human beings. Let me just try and illustrate that point by an interview with Richard Dawkins about love. This is a Christian interview. When you think about your wife, what does love mean? Well, we've been into that before. It's an emotion, which is a manifestation of brain stuff. Jesus said love is the purpose of life. Does that sound nonsense to you? He says, it sounds like something grafted on, a superfluous expressions on life, which I feel I understand better. But it doesn't surprise me that brains, being what they are, have a capacity to invent spurious purposes of the universe. So, in the attempt to account for love, purely in terms of the stuff of biology, Richard Dawkins is committing himself to a very rather bleak view of the world and the significance of love. Love is nothing more than a manifestation of brain stuff. Of course, love comes out of our brains. It is an emotion, there's no denying it, but there's no greater significance for it than that. And so, when we kind of sacrifice our lives to look after a disabled child or our elderly parents out of love for them, when we go to the other side of the world and sacrifice our career because of our love for someone, and when we then try and kind of make those decisions of such significance that they're what our lives are about and important to us, that's who I am, that's the decision I made, what we're doing there is we're imposing something on reality that's not really there. It's artificial. It's us saying, this is what I think it was about, but I know it's not really. Really, all there is the stuff of biology, chemistry, and physics. It's a superfluous excrescence of life, which I feel I understand better. It's a spurious purpose, a purpose I'm imposing on things. So it's a very bleak view, and I think intuitively we recognise that there is more to being human than this. There's more to love. There's something more significant about love than it simply being a manifestation of brain stuff. So that's a slightly soft argument against this idea that science is sufficient. But there's a harder philosophical argument as well, which I'd like to touch on briefly. And the clue to that is in the last thing he says. He says, it doesn't surprise me that brains, being what they are, have a capacity to invent spurious purposes of the universe. Brains being what they are. This is Patricia Churchland, here she is, talking about the function of our brains. She says this, boiled down to essentials, the principal chore of nervous systems is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. A fancier style of representing, so thinking, understanding of it, is advantageous so long as it is geared to the organism's way of life and enhances the organism's chances of survival. Truth, whatever that is, definitely takes the high road. Do you understand what she's saying? She's saying the reason we have brains, the reason we think, the reason we try and make sense of the world is not ultimately to discover something real, to discover what's true, because that's not what our brains are for. Our brains are simply in our heads to help us survive long enough to pass on our genes. Now, sometimes our brains might tell us stuff that's true. We need to know that jumping out of a second floor window isn't a good idea. That's a true thing that the brain can tell. But often, it won't. There's no real need for it to tell me stuff that's true. A case in point is religion. So these guys will often account for religion as simply an artifact of evolution to help with, I don't know, humankind's socialization or something like that. But there's no basis for truth in it. It's just something that's in our heads to help us survive. And of course, you see the problem. This undermines the very thing we're using when we make these claims. If I can't trust my brain, then I can't trust my brain even when my brain tells me I can't trust my brain. This is John Gray. He's making essentially the same point. He says, modern humanism is the faith that through science humankind can know the truth and so be free. But if Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, I'd say sufficient, this is impossible. The human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. Now, John Gray embraces that wholeheartedly. He says we should give up any pretense of thinking we're rational beings who can understand our world. He's written a book called The Silence of the Animals, in which he says we should basically accept ourselves for the irrational animals that we are and not really make any great claims to knowledge about anything. But of course the problem with him saying that is he's written a whole book on the subject. He's not living according to the claim he's making. This is Jeremy Tallis, who's a little more circumspect, and he makes the same point again. The biologistic image of humans, biologistic, everything in terms of biology, effectively denies the centrality, even the possibility, of precisely those unique capacities that have made humans able to theorise about evolution or to develop neuroscience. And this is the point. If on the origin of the species really were the last word on humanity, it could not have been written. So you see, this attempt to squeeze the understanding of ourselves into only what we can find out through the scientific method ultimately doesn't make sense. By censoring out anything in our understanding of ourselves that's not validated by an experiment, the kind of story of ourselves is kind of abridged to such an extent that it's no longer coherent. So in order to understand ourselves, in order to even understand science, we need to go beyond science. This is Professor John Polkinghorne, who was a particle physicist in Cambridge, and he went to become a priest. And he says this, he says, I am certainly someone who wants to take science seriously, but I also need to recognise that science has purchased its great success by the modesty of its ambition. It does not seek to ask and answer every kind of question that an inquiring mind might want to address. Instead, it confines itself to considering solely the processes by which things happen without asking whether there is a meaning or purpose behind what is going on. So we say the reason science is successful is because of the modesty of its ambition. It deals with the stuff you can get hold of and do experiments on. But that doesn't apply to every question. Now that doesn't mean those questions aren't real questions, aren't questions we can discover answers for, but it just means that we need to go beyond science in order to do that. And that's true even if we decide there is no meaning. Even if we decide that only science can give us reliable knowledge about the world, and therefore that's the only way we can understand ourselves. To make that point, we are going beyond science, even in saying it. This is Bertrand Russell. You can see the mistake here. Whatever knowledge is attainable must be attained by scientific methods, and what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. That is a claim to knowledge, and it's a claim that science cannot discover. So we need to go beyond science, whatever conclusion we draw. So this is the mistake, okay? If he be a man, this is a rather old, boring philosophy of science textbook. If he be a man engaged in any important inquiry, he must have a method. And apparently women don't make this mistake, so just and he will be under a strong and constant temptation to make a metaphysics out of his method. That is to suppose the universe ultimately of such a sort that his method must be appropriate and successful. The temptation is to make a metaphysics out of your method. It's to say, this is the only method we can use to understand the world. But that's to make a statement about the world. It sounds a bit complicated. My 2-year-old daughter has already learned not to make this mistake. It's really a very basic mistake to make. This is actually my oldest daughter when she was about 11 months, well, 13 months. And it used to be, when she was maybe 9, 10 months old, I could be playing with my phone in front of her like a good father, and she'd want my phone, she'd try and reach out and grab it. At that age, I could just put my phone in my pocket and she'd forget about it, and she'd move on to wanting something else she could grab. But a couple of months later, that no longer worked. She'd learned this mistake. She'd realised that just because she couldn't see it, didn't mean it wasn't available for her to play with. She just needed to use a new method to discover the reality of my phone and to get access to it. It's a mistake that scientists have to learn not to make very early on. It's no good saying, I've got this really great assay, it gives me really, really reliable results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and restrict my understanding of my subject area only into what I can find out with this assay. If an astronomer's got a telescope that can only see so far, she doesn't say, I'm going to try and squeeze my understanding of the galaxies only into what I can see through my telescope. No, she goes and finds out ways of seeing further. So let's think, what about purpose? How would we discover something such as purpose if science can't help us with it? This is a helpful quote by Leslie Newbigin, a philosopher theologian. He says, "Cause can be discovered by science, but purpose cannot, because until the purpose has been realised, it is hidden in the mind of the one whose purpose it is." Newbigin recognises that purpose is a personal thing. It's something that persons have, people who can look forward into the future and have formed desires and make goals and then work out ways of taking steps to achieve those goals. Purpose is a personal thing. It's something that persons have. And as such, it's a hidden thing. Until that purpose is realised, he says, it's hidden in the mind of the one whose purpose it is. He gives an illustration of a building site. You go to a building site, you see some bricks stacked up here and there, you decide there's a purpose to it. How do you discover what that purpose is? You've got a choice. Either you can take the empirical approach, you can go back every single day and see what emerges from the rubble, whether it's a house or a building, an office block or something, or you can talk to the architect, you can talk to the builder, you can talk to the one whose purpose it is. And he says, when it comes to understanding the purpose of the universe, waiting around until the end is not an option for us. The only way we'll discover that purpose is that if the one whose purpose it is makes that purpose available, makes it accessible, makes it knowable to us. The reason science is successful ultimately is not because of the power, the ingenuity of its methods, although they are powerful and ingenious. The reason it's successful is because of the accessibility of its subject matter. Science focuses on the stuff you can get hold of, you can prod and poke and manipulate and do repeated controlled experiments on. The claim of Christianity is that God himself makes himself accessible to us. This is the beginning of one of the early accounts of Jesus' life, the Gospel of John. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That word "word" is the Greek term logos. For the Greek philosophers of that day, they believed there was a purpose behind the universe. There was a kind of inherent rationality to the world, to why we're here, and the job of the philosopher was to try and access that and then to live their lives in harmony with that purpose. That was the good life. That's what life was all about. And the ideal life was this kind of aristocratic philosopher who could spend all day thinking and trying contemplating the reason behind the universe. And John takes that word logos, the reason behind everything, and he makes this remarkable claim. He goes on to say, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glories of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. The claim of Christianity is that the reason behind everything, the one for whom we are made, makes himself accessible to us. He enters into our world, he enters into history. And as such, he makes himself available to our knowing. The claim of Christianity is that there was this person, Jesus Christ, who entered into history, who made himself known to people, who people saw and touched and believed in, and who transformed their lives. That's a claim you can investigate. You can't really investigate a lofty philosophy or some mystical experience or a private revelation in a cave. But this is a claim you can investigate. God himself submits himself to our scrutiny. But more than that, he makes himself accessible to people like you and I. You don't need to be some great mystic or philosopher or great scientist to encounter ultimate reality. There's a claim here is that God enters into our world and he comes full of grace and truth. The way you discover ultimate reality is through a personal relationship. Now I know I'm a scientist. The idea that there is a person behind the universe could make us feel uncomfortable. We're not people as scientists. But you see, to insist on only believing in stuff you can do an experiment on, is to take a leap of faith. It's to try and dictate to the universe how it should be. It's to decide the answer before you've even begun. It's not ultimately very scientific. If ultimate reality is not something, but someone, the way you encounter that one is going to be different. I'm a scientist, but I'm also married. I know doing experiments on someone is not a good way of getting to know them. This week, we're really wanting you guys to explore this claim for yourself. And the best way to explore this claim is to look into the first-hand evidence of this word becoming flesh. We're giving away these short accounts of Jesus' life, written by John. These are very early, very well-attested accounts of Jesus, written by a close companion, by a friend. If this is true, this is the method. This is the way you need to go about exploring this claim. So please do take one of these away.